Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the third in our series of mental health and wellbeing webinars presented by Dr. Rob Gordon. My name is Angela Whitworth and I work in the Community Engagement and Advancement team at Bushfire Recovery Victoria. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work on and are meeting from today, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So we are recording this webinar, and the recording, as I mentioned, will be made available later on the BRV Facebook page. And I ask you to please keep yourself on mute as Rob talks, but we'll pause for discussion at various points during the meeting. And please use the chat box to ask Rob questions throughout. So today, Rob is presenting 9 months on, looking to the next fire season. Rob will discuss the 9-month mark after the bushfire disaster and what to expect. He'll explore the increased awareness of loss, while also looking to prepare and plan for the upcoming fire season, changes in weather and marking anniversaries. So I'd like to now introduce our wonderful presenter, Dr. Rob Gordon. Rob is a clinical psychologist and expert in mental health first aid and supporting people affected by bushfires. He has been working alongside BRV, providing advice and sessions like this for bushfire affected people and communities. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Angela. Good afternoon, everyone. We're 9 months or so down the track. And what I wanted to do was to talk a bit about what we can expect at this point of the recovery process and looking towards the upcoming fire season and anniversaries and all the challenges that those things might provide for us. And thinking about how do we use them for some kind of therapeutic opportunity. That is, use these naturally occurring rhythms to help in the process of working, continuing to work through all the experiences we collect as part of a big natural disaster event. So I don't know whether all the blocks have been cleared, but a lot of blocks have been cleared, haven't they? And that gives people a sense of we're ready to start, although I did hear someone refer to how squashed and damaged their property felt like after the big machinery's been through. And we know that the clearing itself is a painful process. And as somebody once said, I think it was somebody in Christchurch who finally saw their house debris removed after the earthquake. It said it might be just a pile of rubbish, but it's my rubbish. And so there's this sense of the final removal of the debris is the final remnants of the old life has been taken away. So that's quite a painful process. And along with that, there's the opportunity for now the beginning of the new rebuilding process. But that's not clear-cut either, is it? So some people can seize that opportunity to get going and start. Maybe they've started some planning already or some design, and they're people who can start the process of building straight away. But there are other people who are still arguing with their insurance company who've got all sorts of challenges about planning and regulations, and other people who have got so many other problems getting the rest of their life organised, managing their temporary accommodation, solving all the problems, and not even to mention COVID and teaching your kids at home and so on, that they just don't have space to start thinking about rebuilding yet, and farmers on farms. totally flat out, trying to just get things going again. So it's a very complex picture, and around about now, we see this spectrum between people leaping into this opportunity and starting to do things, and every time they achieve something, there's a great sense of achievement, and that brings with it optimism and a sense that we're going to get through this. Whereas at the other extreme, there are people who feel as though they just can't get on with it because they're blocked by insurance controversies or various other bureaucratic obstacles. And of course, every one of those obstacles becomes a source of frustration, which translates into despondency and difficulty working. And I want to emphasise this because some people find that the problems are to do with external circumstances, but there are also others who find that the problems are actually more to do with the inability to actually get on, to make decisions. I spoke some weeks ago to a woman who said she just couldn't make any decisions. She just felt completely overwhelmed. She's trying to manage a rural property by herself, and every task was sort of completely new to her. She's been used to managing this property by herself for some time, but the tasks for the bushfire are quite different. And the implications of the decisions she would make just made it just feel so complex, and she just described herself as being overwhelmed. And so she couldn't do anything. And of course, her rather large family would come and feel impatient that she wasn't getting on with it. And they'd say, "Mum, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Why don't you do this?" And they go away and come back, and she hadn't rung all these people and done all these things. And they'd get frustrated, irritable. "You've got to do something to help yourself." What she really needed was someone to sit down and help her sort through it and talk about it. And maybe even sit on the phone for however long it took to get through to the right person about a particular issue and find out what needed to be done. And so what we see is this spectrum of problems. Hers was an internal state of mind problem. Other people are stuck by hard external circumstances. And this means we've got different rates of response. And around about now, I think we start to see this complex picture where some people are moving ahead in a constructive, motivated way and feeling satisfaction, and other people are stuck and things maybe are even deteriorating. And I think of this as I call it a dual process in the recovery. We can't think of there is one process and people are at one stage. So these two groups have a lot of difficulty understanding each other. And as time goes by, this discrepancy, this tension can open up more and more. And so it becomes so important that we accept the fundamental fact that no one really has the right to judge anyone else's process, because you don't know enough about their life to understand why they are in the situation they are. And I can assure you from my years of talking to people in all sorts of capacities that everyone has very good reason to be the way they are, given who they are and what their life experience is. And even if they're doing things that don't make sense to us, there'll be a reason behind that, but we probably won't ever know unless we sit down and go through everything with them. So therefore, we need to try and build in, for the community to be a supportive environment, build in this principle of respecting individual processes and not judging, supporting people to take the time they need, and not creating these benchmarks based on people whose circumstances are maybe more fortunate or who've got particular skills or experience that enables them to move ahead more rapidly. And as we sort of look ahead from these two different positions, the people who are active and solving problems and moving ahead and maybe also got quite a lot of support around them, find they can be optimistic and around about this time to start to think about future goals, the house they're going to have, the lifestyle they want to develop. Whereas the others who can't move on are at great risk for starting to feel pessimism. Pessimism is when you're not sure that things are going to work out too well, where you start to expect something will go wrong. And so that buoyancy, that emotional energy that we need is sapped. Now, in this situation, people communicate readily to each other. And when the pessimists talk to each other, they tend to feel, bleak and critical. When they talk to the optimists say things that just don't seem to gel. And so this people's communication moves past each other. And I think it's only when we translate from how we feel about the future to what's really happening and what we can do about it, that we get to some basis on which we can actually do something to help. But often our ordinary conversations are very emotional, based on emotions and sentiments and feelings. And that's where people in these two different states just don't actually find common ground. And so what I think is so important is to listen and try to understand each other in this stage of affairs. But there's a challenge to that, because one of the things I want to talk about is the fatigue. The fatigue that comes from being in the state of continuing stress that people have been in for a long time now. In New South Wales, is anyone from there? We're coming up quite soon to some anniversaries, aren't we? Or maybe that's Queensland. The Queensland fires, I think, were late September or October. New South Wales ones are November, and so on. So as we head into these challenging times, the effect of the fatigue that people have been in starts to bite. Now, there's a particular quality of fatigue because it's a particular quality of stress. The stress is not the stress of the early days when you're rushing around doing things for long hours, but the stress of not being able to rest, having to keep plodding, keep persisting, and knowing that whatever you're doing, there's this huge body of work hanging over your head. And it might be rebuilding a house, it might be redoing a farm, it might be fixing up all the damage around your house, it might be participating in community activities, which is a huge additional burden to one's life. And it may be that there's also the suspension of the normal recreational opportunities and options that we have in this recovery-based environment. And so there's this continuous dealing with problems. And I've talked in greater detail, and I won't go into so much detail now, about this state of continuing stress, which is generated by cortisol, a chemical that conserves and embodies our ability to just keep on going, doggedly persisting. It shuts down everything unnecessary. It narrows and focuses our attention onto what seems to be the most high priority things we have to do, and just shuts everything else out. It's a state that shuts down our awareness of each other and of ourselves, so that we can focus the available energy we have onto the tasks that we feel will relieve our current situation. Now, you know, this is the zombie mode that we all have experienced in different ways at different times of our lives. It's the state that we go into when, for instance, there's a serious illness in the family with a loved one, or a bereavement. You suddenly find yourself in this state. You don't ask yourself whether you want to be in it or not. You're just in it. And you're just locked on to what you have to do. It's not a question of, I don't feel like it, I'm not in the mood for it. You're just there and you have to do it, because it really involves fundamental structures and systems of your life that must be taken up and safeguarded and cared for. But the very zombie mode of it means that I shut down one of the things that I normally use to guide my work, and that is my understanding of myself and my really important long-term values. The deeper we get into this cortisol zombie mode, the more we just plot ahead with the next step and the next step and the next step and the next step. And to get that energy, we keep divesting ourselves of other what feel like obligations or demands or whatever. And we get into this narrowed lifestyle. And we know that in this state, that our brain, under the effect of cortisol, sort of hunkers down to those functions in the brain that are routinized, familiar, and automatic. So in that state, we can do anything that we've done before. So people tend to opt for the things that they can do rather than those things that might be new or difficult, that they would be better spending their time. So I use the example of the farmer who just feels overwhelmed and disorganized at the thought that he has to sit down and think about finances and work out whether he needs another low interest loan or make an application for something, and would much rather throw all the papers in the air and go out and build another kilometre of fencing, which he can do very easily, and he's got something to show for it at the end of the time. This is true cortisol zombie mode. And while he's doing that, it's a relief. He doesn't have to think about anything else. And so there are all sorts of ways in which we would lapse into this process. But this being in this state for any length of time means we get into a state of mind where we can feel that the most important resource we've got, which is our mind and brain, is not serving us very well. One of the first ways that that's shown is we start to have memory problems. Cortisol is an incredibly important chemical, not for remembering material itself, but organising and laying down memories so that we can remember that we remember them and we know where they are. The very same woman I spoke about earlier told me, I think I spoke to her on Monday again, that she lives about an hour and a half's drive away from the nearest significant shopping centre, and she had to go and get a spare part for one of her machines. And she drove all the way in there and realised she left a piece of paper with the specifications on the kitchen table. Now, this is pretty annoying, isn't it? So she's not going to drive back an hour and a half and get it and drive it back. She's going to have to postpone and leave that whole job until next time she goes to town. Now, you can multiply that by innumerable examples. I had a farmer who told me, it was in the Lockyer Valley actually after a flood, that, and it was probably around about this time after the flood there, that he would find himself sewing himself up, going into the shed and getting a spanner, going out to his tractor, starting to set it up to do some work. And then he'd need another spanner and he'd go into the shed, and then he'd see the pump that was half dismantled on the bench, and he'd realised he'd forgotten to finish that off, so he'd get sidetracked onto that. And then he'd need another tool, and he'd go to another shed and he'd see something else that was half done. And he actually described he went from one thing to another during the day, and only at the end of the day, as he was walking back to the house, did he see the tractor waiting to be fixed up. He'd actually forgotten what he was doing because he kept getting drawn by the next little concrete thing. And this is what I call dithering, that people dither. They move from one thing to another and become extremely inefficient. Now, when you're doing that, trying to build a house or do something effectively, you actually start to really get more and more frustrated with yourself. And of course, it's easy to sort of take it out on everyone around you, kick the cat and yell at people and so on. So that this sort of state of mind, if we're not careful, we don't recognise it, starts to undermine a whole lot of other things. I think it's very important. There's a group in the Yarra Valley that referred to this state, was not in this first year, or it was in about the third and fourth year this group was meeting, and they referred to it as the corduroy zone. It was a sort of garbled translation of cortisol into corduroy. So they said, we've been in the corduroy zone, and they would all sympathise with it. Oh, isn't the corduroy zone terrible? You can't get anything done. And I think it's so important to have a word for it. And you know, people talk about bushfire brain, don't they? Because they know their brains aren't working right. They talk about flood brain in Queensland. They talk about earthquake brain and cyclone brain in Queensland, Christchurch, places like that. Because people can feel, and it is true, your brain in high loads of cortisol doesn't work as it should. You can get into the systems that are routinized, that are sort of lower down in the brain. You can't get into this top part where we engage in our creative thinking, our lateral problem solving, our strategic planning. And these are the skills we most importantly need. And there's a couple of other things. When we go into this stress state, we become egocentric, self-centered, because the whole thing of stress is, how do I focus everything on what I have to do because I'm the stressed one and these are my stressors. But of course, nobody's got exactly the same priorities. And so in marriages, people have arguments about what is important to be doing. And maybe one partner will yell, this is what I have to do, because it's actually the only thing they can do. And the other partner saying, that's not the most important thing, this is what we have to do. But actually, I don't feel I could do that because that involves a bit of lateral thinking or unfamiliar work or creative problem solving, and I can't do it. So I think what's really important is to just recognise these all as symptoms of, let's call it bushfire brain. And that means to actually work out how do we get back the most important resource we've got. So in order to recognise this, I've invented some terminology. There's a lot of talk about stress and psychological problems and whether you've got a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress and whatever else. But actually, these are not mental disorders. Well, they are disorders in the sense that you're disordered and you can't function. But they're not mental disorders showing that there's an illness process, because they are completely normal. We will all get into that state if we stay stressed for long enough. And so I've got three of them. These are stress disorders. The first one is cognitive disruption. This is the state that a normal person of normal intelligence will get into when they can't think straight, they can't solve problems, and they can't even remember where they put their shopping list. And they can't make a new shopping list because they can't remember what was on it unless they go back to the shed and look at the machinery again. And this is cognitive disruption. Their ability to use what they've got is disrupted. But it's only disrupted, it's not damaged. As soon as they get out of that stress state, they will be able to start thinking again. And maybe a social contact and talking to someone and taking them out of their very self-centered frame of mind is going to be the answer. The second one is emotional overload. Emotional overload is when I've been dealing with a lot of emotions, I've been holding it display my frustration, my worry, my despair, my whatever. We can throw in grief, my traumatic responses, which I've had to put aside in order to deal with all the stuff about rebuilding and so on. And now some small thing happens that injects a little bit of more emotion into my system, and I just feel overloaded. I'm completely emotionally overloaded. Now, that doesn't always manifest as an emotional outburst, dropping down and bursting into tears, or throwing a spanner across the shed or whatever. It can be, I just feel so anxious and worried about things, I just can't work out what to do next. Like this woman I described, this woman with the property who had so many things she just felt completely, she used the word overwhelmed. I couldn't make decisions. She couldn't ring up Blaze Aid. She couldn't do anything. And emotional overload means I've got too much emotion and I've lost my ability to juggle it. And again, it's not a disorder, because as soon as the person is able to get out of that for a while, allow things to settle, then they can start to actually pick their way through it all. And the third one is action impotence. I've got an action, a task, a decision, a job that I need to do, but I just can't do it today. You know, we've all been in that state, haven't we? It's a really important, difficult phone call you have to make, and I really should make it today because it'll be a little bit worse if I don't, but I just can't do it. I just don't feel up to it. I think these are really important things to respect. They're not weaknesses. I like to mention the professor of psychology who got a group of students and he got them to measure their hand grip, and he measured it, calibrated it and wrote numbers down, how strong their hand grip was. Then he asked them to spend half an hour trying to solve very complex mental problems. You know, not just long division and so on, but kind of logical problems. If this was that and that was that, how many was this? Including problems that didn't have an answer, but it wasn't apparent it didn't have an answer until you'd spend about half an hour cudgeling your brain trying to find an answer. And then whether they found their answer or not didn't matter, but he then blew the whistle and asked them to measure their hand grip again, and they were statistically weaker in their hand grip, exactly as though they'd been using their arm muscles instead of their brain. And I think that's a really important implication. I think we know it mentally. You ask any year 12 person when they come out of an exam, they'll feel utterly exhausted. And I think there is a physical exhaustion that is so associated with this constant juggling and struggling and trying to work out things and balance them and so on, that creates this state of what looks like weakness, but is actually a state of exhaustion in our cognitive ability to think and manage and solve problems, in our emotional system to allow us to manage and identify and put into perspective emotions, and in our action system, the ability to actually engage and pursue and solve a goal. And the important thing is they're all normal. I guarantee everybody can be put into these states of cognitive disruption, emotional overload, and action impotence, given the right situation. And one of the big problems is that if we don't know that, we start to engage in a whole lot of secondary process of saying, I'm weak, I'm disordered, I can't trust myself, I'm not the person I used to be. And this then creates a bit of a spiral. And I think that's something we can cut off by actually making it clear. You know, I've been doing this work since Ash Wednesday, and, you know, I saw all these things then. I saw them in Christchurch. I saw them in the Lockyer Valley after the floods, in the cyclones. They are same fundamental processes that any healthy person will get into if they don't take care of themselves enough. And so the more we actually recognise it's the circumstances, not us, that's the problem. It gives us the ability to try and make some decisions about taking care of ourselves. Now, I want to go on and talk about how do we look at the perspective going ahead from here, given that many people will, in a greater or lesser degree, be in this state. And I notice there's a few people who are working in various agencies providing services. So I'm not going to leave you guys out either, because you're probably doing your normal work as well. And so I think everybody, council workers, government department workers, all of these other groups are at risk for being sucked into this same state because of the multiple tasks that need to be done. But I just wondered whether anyone's got any questions or comments about this cortisol state, the corduroy zone, the bushfire brain. It's a bit of a misnomer because it's not just the brain, it's the whole being. I quite like the corduroy zone. Any questions or thoughts about this? Tasman is saying she totally identifies. Is there any exercises to do when you get into this state? How would you feel, Tamsin, if when you're in heavy corduroy zone, I said, here's a piece of paper with a whole lot of exercises to go and do? I think it's good to ask, but I actually would like to say the first thing you have to do is to say, I must get myself out of the stress state any way I can. Somebody's saying when preparing residents to be resilient, it's hard to try to help them to recognise temporary state, because the essence of stress is the externalisation of all of the attention I normally engage in monitoring myself out onto the problem. Isn't that a great way of redistributing resources and getting more output? It's as though you're driving your car and you're going up such a steep hill that you have to suddenly translate all of the electronic energy that's telling you about the speed and the fuel gauge and all the rest of it, and you put all that into the engine as well. And let's say we'll even suck all the kinetic energy from the tyres into turning the wheels, and so the tyres go flat. And you're getting a lot more energy into turning the wheels, but you're losing a lot of functions. You don't know what the car's doing. The tyres have gone flat, and it's all much harder. And so therefore, I think that the important point here is self-awareness. When you've made the 10th stupid mistake, gone up to look for your glasses and spend half an hour and you find that actually you're wearing them, that sort of thing. These are really strong signals. I'm in the corduroy zone. And so what you need to do is to actually ask yourself, what will take me out of it? And that is stop working. Put aside all the imaginary priorities of how important things are and to start focusing on what do I need to do. I want to come back to that in a little bit, but fundamentally we could say anything that recruits energy, that gives you energy back, but a particular sort of energy, because we know that just taking a rest, having a good meal is not enough. This is a kind of overall whole of self-exhaustion, because the cortisol takes energy from every tissue. It reverses the normal cycle where we create energy molecules and we saturate all our cells with them. The energy molecules are broken down in the tissues and release energy for whatever the tissues need. But under that chronic stress situation, the walls of the cells are changed, and these energy molecules are leached out of all of the unnecessary cells and stuck where they're needed, which is probably brain and brawn. That's probably about it. And so hence we get all of these other physical ailments that show our bodies losing energy. And so what we have to do is reverse that. take the pressure off. And that means even for short periods of time, make sure you take a lunch break. Make sure if you can do nothing more than that, take Sunday afternoon off. That means off. That means from the end of lunch on Sunday until dinner time, you don't do anything useful. You have to completely waste the time by doing whatever you feel like. It's got nothing to do with all your jobs. And you can follow one guide, enjoyment. Just do what you enjoy. That'll be the guide, but that's normally shut well and truly down in the corduroy zone. We have to waken it up and let these things which guide us normally, the processes we override to keep working. And we have to get back in touch with this. And it's painful. I've got so much to do, I can't sit around and do nothing. Yes, you must. Sit with your children. Just give them your full attention and see what happens. Sit with your partner. Sit in the sun. Read a book that's not going to be useful, that you enjoy. Anything. Play music. Go for a walk. And if you can do it on Sunday afternoon, maybe you could do it on Sunday morning as well. And why not Saturday evening, and Wednesday evening? Break up the continuity with this, because the body needs to rediscover and hold on to the basic reference point of what normality is. That's what gets lost. Wasting time can be a guilt trip, says Judith Jackson. Yes, we're brought up not to waste time, aren't we, from childhood? Hands up all those whose parents said, stop wasting time and get on and do something useful. Actually, I want you to recalibrate that wasting time is the antidote to the corduroy zone. I don't mean wasting time. I mean just doing something that's wasting time from the point of view of your task, of your job, of your stress. And so that really means just actually breathing out. I think this stress state cramps us up. If you hold your arm in a tense position, after a while it'll lock, won't it? The muscles will lock and you'll have a lot of trouble letting it go. And that cramp, and I think we get our whole being gets into a cramp of just doing. It's painful to let go, but that's the point at which we should do it. Here we go. Danny Sheehan is saying the bushfire recovery space has grown with many from different backgrounds, people with great intent but not trauma-informed. Noticed elements of emotional contagion and potential vicarious trauma becoming evident in stress workers. Can I talk to this? I'm going to get on and talk about trauma in a minute, but let's just link that to the stress state. That in fact, what's so important here is that that if we don't really connect with these processes and understand what people are going through, we might inadvertently increase the stress by saying, come on, it's about time you got some jobs done. What can I help you do? And so on. And just creating more of this sort of activity-oriented process. It's just, I'd like to come back to the trauma aspect in a moment, Danny, but can spending time in this state affect your long-term memory of these periods? Yes, because part of what we get from cortisol in memory is that the proper functioning of our memory is the sense of a biographical memory. I've been through this time and I understand what happened and the experiences I had and what I learned from it, and this is who I am now as a result of it. That means processing time. When you're in high cortisol mode, you don't do any processing, you just go on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And did you ever have that feeling of you suddenly put your head up and think, why am I doing this again? If you're working, or you suddenly think, well, it's dangerous if you get to that point where you say, well, who cares anyway? Chuck any house up, I don't care what I have, I just need somewhere to sleep. It means you're beginning to disengage. But we also get to the point where people think, is it 9 months already? It only feels like last week that we had the fires. Or is it only 9 months? I feel as though I've been doing this for about 20 years. I can't remember what normal life was like. There are these distortions of memory that occur in this state where you're just focused on the next moment and the next moment. And this means you're losing that frame of your life as an evolving process that tells you who you are. And the end result of that down the track is, I don't know who I am or where I'm going or what I'm doing anymore. And we call that in psychology, we'll call that an identity crisis. And it's dangerous because if you lose touch with the values that were the central features of your life beforehand, you feel adrift afterwards when you have got everything done. You've got a nice new house to live in, but you don't actually feel you know what you're doing. The same farmer that I mentioned who went from his tractor to his pump to his other shed and so on, he told me that what he noticed in this state was he lost pride and love of his farm. It just became a job. And yet the farm was the great highlight of his life. He'd saved and scrimped to buy this farm and it was his greatest joy, but he lost pleasure in it. It took some time for him to come out of this state and rediscover the projects he had and the plans and the sense of the future as his farm started to recover from the flood. So therefore, it affects your long-term memory in that your long-term memory loses its structure really, and you feel adrift in life. Did pleasure return to him? He used to say to his family who moved after the flood into the town nearby, and he said, don't come out, I haven't fixed everything up, don't come out, don't come out. He felt ashamed. But by the time I finished talking to him, and it didn't take that long, as once he understood his state, he actually, he did start to recover his joy, yes. But you could see how he could have slipped into depression and maybe sold his farm because it was too painful, and then he'd lose something really important in his life. So it's, it's really important to keep track of these things. Am I describing depression? Not yet, but it'll be there. Depression is when we add to that heaviness, sadness, fatigue, a kind of self-critical process, a self-devaluing process. And then we start to get bogged down. Well, what's the point? Don't worry about me anyway. Depressed people often are very critical and put themselves down and withdraw. It's danger. And that's where we can start off and see what happens if we can draw the person into enjoying themselves a bit and just taking time out and trying to re-find what made life meaningful. Any other questions? I haven't picked all of these up. Maybe somebody, is it Linda, is saying during the Malakuta fire, I found it took a long time to restore memory function back to anywhere near normal. Nothing seemed to stick. Yes. So you can watch your memory and that'll give you a sign of how your brain's going. It's physical. It's about what's happening to the chemistry in your brain. People in this stress state find they can't read books. Do any of you notice you can't read books? Nobody reads books nowadays anyway. They all watch the internet. But, your concentration span gets lost. Watch it and just really focus on doing nothing. Just chilling out, because when we do that, we process, sit in the sun and you'll find thoughts circulate in your mind. That's when you start to, I call it digestion. you digest, right? You digest. And that leads me to the idea of, you know, if you have a good dinner and then you start running a marathon, you're not going to digest it, are you? You'll probably lose it after about 5 kilometres if you're me. Maybe some of you will get to 10 before you lose it because nothing's going on in the stomach and it goes out. And that's the kind of regurgitation you get. Someone was telling me this morning that he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and he starts just going over and over all the things he has to do. He can't do any of them at 3 o'clock in the morning, but he just can't stop rehearsing and planning and writing the letters and having the conversations and doing the jobs. You know, it's going round and round. He's actually having indigestion, isn't he? He's having regurgitation in an unproductive way. So what would stop that is more time to just chill out and do nothing. And all of that stuff takes care of itself. And the marathon leads me to the notion that we're actually on a recovery marathon. Now, we use that word sort of loosely, don't we? I mean, marathon is, what is it, 46 kilometres or something? And we know that the person that will win the marathon is the person that starts off at a steady speed that he can or she can maintain right through to the end. And you can see them, though, you know, a whole lot of people run off and they get well ahead. And then slowly, if you ever sort of watch one of these marathons, slowly this person comes pegging them back. It probably happens in the Tour de France this evening. Pegging them back, and then just slowly goes past them. They're exhausted. Somebody else runs up and goes out ahead, and this is the person that runs in at the end and no one else is in sight. And I just think that this is such an important principle. How do we maintain a pace that we can keep going for the, let's face it, years? Some people probably can do their recovery in less than a year, but in my experience, not many. It takes most people a couple of years to get a house up and move in and feel comfortable. Some, it'll take 4 years if they've got other problems. Some good people probably say, I'm not going to worry about my house, I'm going to actually get my family sorted, deal with the trauma and make sure everything else is working. Then I'll turn my head to my house. And they've got a clear idea of what the most important priority is, haven't they? So that if we're thinking about this marathon that we have to run, we're not just focusing on what we have to do now, we've got to focus on the whole course we have to do and how we can actually do that safely, which means we've got to think about the pace. What resources do I need? You need a working brain, you need energy level, you need your family to be supportive so that you're not torn by a whole lot of other family problems. You need supports. You probably need someone to talk to outside of your family, a friend or another relative or something, so you don't have to load all your emotional needs into the family. You've got stuff you share with them, and then you've got other supports. We know that people who have a complex set of relationships are more resilient than those whose relationships are all focused, whose needs are all focused in one or two relationships. We need replenishment. That is opportunities to recharge. Actually, a lot of people have said to me, a really important way to recharge is not very easy at the moment, but is to get out of the area for a little while, every now and again. Just get away, anywhere. Hopefully somewhere nice that a friend makes available to you or something. Joy. Joy is such an essential experience. So do we, in this corduroy zone, keep alive our opportunities for joy? You know, take the time for a game of golf or go fishing or a game of cards or whatever we might do. Achievement. Really make sure that you work out some things you can actually do so that you can, at the end of the week, and say, I've done this. That's a great boost to us, isn't it? Isn't it depressing when you spend a whole week working and you haven't resolved anything? And now all of these things require thought and planning, don't they? I think it's really important that when we think about this recovery marathon, we actually think we've probably got to spend a little bit more time deliberately planning our week and our activities and our goals and the order in which we do things and how we factor other things in. And how do we do that if you're in the cortisol mode? Well, I think this is where we have to use each other. I think it's really valuable that families have family conversations. Actually, kids can quite often say some home truths to parents about what should be happening. Why can't we do this? We used to, these sort of questions. Well, what do you think we're doing? Would shut them down completely, wouldn't it? Actually, it reminds me of the New Zealand dairy farmer who told me this story. I'd been there early after the flood that was devastating to their area and given one of my talks on cortisol state. Towards the end of that first year, he came in, he said, from working until dark on his tractor. Exhausted, he dropped down in front of the TV in the chair, waiting for his wife to dish up the dinner, and his 5-year-old daughter's playing by his side. And she says, "Daddy." "Yes, dear," he says, exhausted. "How come you don't play with us anymore?" Now, he said, because he had this idea of the cortisol state in his mind, he actually heard it. He heard that he was in the process of losing his relationship with his daughter. So after dinner, he sat his wife down and they worked out how they would make plans to go for 2 weeks to the seaside as soon as they could. It was near the end of the year, so he actually made sure that they actually went as a family to the beach. Now, you could imagine if he was irritable and tired and short-tempered and he turned around and he said, "Well, what do you think I'm doing? We've got a flood." And could you imagine that she would actually never ask him again? That I think it happens to kids that we snap at them when they ask a question and they think, "Oops, I better not ask that question again. And by the way, I thought fathers were supposed to play with their kids, but apparently that's wrong. So I don't expect that anymore." And what you see is little shifts that occur during this time where people lose qualitative interactions and relationships that enrich and give joy to their lives because they just lost track of it all. And so listening to each other, listening to, and maybe, we have to wait until our lockdown's finished, but talking with friends, helping them think through, having your family, your extended family and friends outside the area lend you their brain, thinking through, "I've got so much going on, can you help me just think about how we might do this?" Talking, this is what often gets sorted out in casual conversation. Using networks to actually think about this and engage in this strategic planning to run the marathon. Now, I want to move on to the hurdles ahead. You thought it was just a marathon on the flat, didn't you? But it's actually a 46-kilometre hurdles. What are the hurdles? Well, we'll leave out the clearing of the blocks and a whole lot of other things. And we'll just say, first of all, the hot weather. We've had a ferocious north wind here in the Yarra Valley, and it's been not freezing cold. I wouldn't say it's actually warm, but it's not freezing cold anymore. And I remember that ferocious north wind from Black Saturday, and this is, the first time in conjunction with warmish weather. It's still sort of, I start looking at the grass and think about all the things I need to do. So, you know, the coming season, the hot weather creates this concern. Planned burns. Have they started? If not, they soon will. There'll be smoke. Smoke has associations. Anniversaries are going to start coming up. They're full of complicated feelings. Then there's your own fire plans and fire preparation. Judith Jackson is saying the smoke has started and the children are concerned. Yes. And so Judith, you're also making it complicated. Drought, fire, flood and COVID. We'll deal with one at a time. But the fire preparation and plans, these are all things that then suddenly are additional tasks in addition to whatever else is happening. And I want to just have a look at some of the processes they bring up. You can't avoid them. They're going to come. The first one really is how trauma, as we head towards the end of the year, will actually come back. When I say trauma, I mean not just PTSD, but all the horrible experiences and feelings we had on the day and associated with it. It could be anything from being threatened by fire, to watching your house burn, maybe on the internet, to not knowing where loved ones were for some time, not knowing how you're going to get out, not knowing what's going to happen. It's all part of the picture. So we need to see that as we go into an environment where circumstances will bring these experiences to us, we have a choice of when it evokes those traumatic emotions and memories and states of mind, we either go into defensive mode and fend them off, which only creates this intrusive looping and post-traumatic stress, or we engage with it in a therapeutic way and use this as one more opportunity to do a little bit of work on this and reduce that trauma response. Because what we've got to remember is that the state we're in when we have the trauma is a very unusual state. We're in this very high threat situation. We're not in the cortisol state, we're in the adrenaline state, where our instincts, our fight-flight instinct is engaged. And we process things in a very unique way with very primitive parts of our brain that are very quick and dirty. And they will take the images. Now, when I say image, I mean visual images, auditory images, the sound, the smell image, the smell of the smoke, whatever other experience, maybe the physical sensations of heat, whatever, any of this sensory experience becomes fused as the trigger for the emotional response. The fear of death, the fear of losing someone, the fear of the grief of losing all your stuff, whatever it might be. Just the grief of, well, the fear and grief that it might happen is enough. And so these become welded to the emotions. The sensory images become welded to the emotions that you had. And they're not welded to what happened. They're welded to the idea of what you got prepared for, what you thought was going to happen. It's a very important point. We can't say that the trauma is what happened. It's what I thought was going to happen. So you often get people who've got, I don't know, some training or knowledge. They can look at the situation. They say it's very dangerous, but it's going to be all right for these and these reasons. And beside them, you've got somebody else who doesn't have the same information, perspective or experience, who thinks we're never going to get out of this. And so you've got two people who have the same exposure and they have a completely different reaction, because one person's carrying this huge life-threatening experience and the other one's saying, yeah, well, if it plays out the way I thought it did, then my judgment was good. I trust my judgment. And so it's a highly subjective thing. Again, we come back to this thing. Nobody is in a position to judge anybody else's traumatic experience. We have to reconstruct it by understanding what they thought was going to happen as well as what did happen. And so the first thing we have to do if we're going to engage therapeutically to rehabilitate ourselves from trauma is to recognise the triggers, recognise that they put us into this state. Now, to begin with, that might take you back. I remember what it was like. But probably it won't take you back to a memory of a past event. It will first simply evoke the experiences you had, the emotions you had. You will just go straight into anxiety. Now, if you don't stop and think about that, the anxiety will translate itself. Let's say there's a planned burn going off, you smell the smoke, and you feel the anxiety surge up in you, and it might suddenly manifest as anger and rage. How could they be doing this? Why haven't they told us? What do they think they're doing, etc.? And you just get furious and want to go down to the DELP office and start yelling at someone. This means that the anxiety has gone right through and translated into action to resolve the anxiety. I'm going to yell at someone that's made me anxious. Oh, it mightn't be DELP either, but it won't matter. I'll yell at somebody and that'll help. It doesn't really help. And what we need to try and do is say, okay, as we're going into this, we don't know what all our triggers are. We will have to discover them when the sensory situation stimulates us, when we have the experience. I remember after Black Saturday, a woman describing how she drove through the Christmas Hills, the back of where I live, in the middle of winter to a meeting down in Yarra Glen. And as she comes around the corner, she hits a cloud bank, fog bank, but it looks like smoke, doesn't it? She runs into this fog bank and she starts to have a sort of panic attack and sort of anxiety and hyperventilating, and she has to pull over and sort of talk herself down, just talk herself down, breathe deeply, quietly say, it's okay, it's just fog, it's just fog. Now, every time she takes that moment, takes the time, talks herself, because when she's talking, she's using a proper intelligent human brain to actually disrupt the fight-flight instinct loop that's deep down in her reptile brain. She's coming in saying, it's okay, it's fog. Not everything grey is dangerous. It's wintertime. There's no fire. She's talking herself down. And so I think we have to be aware that we've got work to do. And it might not be just at that simple level, but remember, and if you don't remember, it might be worth looking it up. Remember the warnings that were given the day before the fire around Malakuta and East Gippsland. The Bureau of Meteorology knew there was a line of thunderstorms going to move across East Gippsland. And there would be many dry lightning events, which would probably start lots of fires in drought-affected forest at the same time. It's an extremely dangerous situation. So next time you get that environment, you need to know, well, is it all drought affected in the same way? Have we got a whole line of thunderstorms that's going across the whole of East Gippsland? We have to take into account the sensory impression might be the same, but the whole environment might be different. The same with floods. There are very specific weather patterns that cause floods. I remember working with people in the central Victorian floods a few years ago when there was a decaying cyclone coming down from Western Australia and another decaying cyclone coming down from Queensland, and these two weather systems met over central Victoria and dropped all their rain. It was a huge event. And of course, some people said whenever it rained on the roof, they just wept. Because they felt this trauma come up. It was a very dangerous flash flood for some people. And I was saying, you have to really look at the weather map or go online and check out. It's not going to be the same. Not all rain will be flood. Not all fires will be devastating and so on. So what I would say is as you go into the end of the year, really try to hang on to how circumstances separate what's happening now from what happened last year or the beginning of this year. And that means holding on to our thinking, holding on to information, and knowing what the circumstances are. And we get this by talking. And when somebody says, I'm terrified because of the hot weather, we need to go online and find out what can we say that modifies the threat. And most of the time we find that it's probably not going to be as bad. There will be other options. And what's particularly important about this is to accept the opportunities we have to deal with the trauma. Planned burns, hot weather. I want to say something about anniversaries, fire preparations. Probably lots of people weren't nearly as prepared as they should have been. Usually people aren't. So again, it's not going to be reassuring if you've actually spent some time planning and you're as well prepared as you can, including recognising your ability for decision making is not going to be at its best when you're in a state of high threat and high arousal. And that's why being very clear about when is best to evacuate, really thinking that through. When do you want to evacuate? What will be the signals? How will you make sure you talk to people? Going right through all the different fire preparation processes so that you harness that arousal into action to protect. And the more we do that, the less we will get caught up in what happened in, well, was it New Year's Eve? And the more we'll stay with what's happening now, because the trauma doesn't discriminate. It says every fire is going to be devastating. We're going to go into the same state. So the trauma, getting back to the notion of a trauma-informed state, the crucial issue here is to understand the triggering, the arousal, and that once you're in that arousal, you're going to be inclined to repeat the pattern. You're not going to make good decisions. So you need to manage the arousal in any way you can and then start thinking about what you know. So there will be very important opportunities to deal with that all the way through. And we can perhaps talk about that a little more in a moment. But I just wanted to say a couple of words about the other major problem, which is loss. Trauma and loss are the two most painful experiences. Loss is evoked by traumatic memories too. You lost, luckily there were not so many deaths this time, but for anyone who did lose anyone, those triggers that evoke that event are going to bring back that loss, or it's going to bring back the loss of property and lifestyle. You know, people have said, I really enjoyed the lifestyle I had before the fire. I was very happy. I spent a lot of time getting things in order, and now I've lost it, and I don't know when I'll get it back. That's a loss. There's a loss that is referred to by the people that study these things as intangible loss. You know, you don't have to lose something to lose. You might have lost your community. You might have lost friendship networks, a whole range of things that aren't as clear cut. And so just to think about how those experiences of loss get evoked around the time of as we move towards the anniversary, but as we move towards anything that triggers those memories. Now, how do we take a therapeutic attitude to loss? just what do we mean by loss? Well, we mean, we form an internal map of everything in our world. When we form an attachment to a person, we anchor our experience of that person within us as you could say, as some kind of mental image. You could say some kind of internal, emotionally charged experience of that person that we carry within us. We know that little children, if separated from their parents, get terribly upset and panicky because it looks like they don't feel sure that their parents are going to come back, or even maybe still exist when they're out of sight. And then there's a certain point where they know, mum's out of the room, she'll be back in a minute, or I'm staying with grandma and she's gone off to have dinner and she's going to come back later on, everything's all right. So we say they've got internal object constancy. They hold inside themselves the experience even when the person's not there. That's the healthy state, is this. And this really shows us that we build an internal world. Anything we love is represented within us by an emotionally charged memory, objects, wedding presents, gifts, heirlooms, anything that has emotional significance is there as an internal thing. A house that we've worked incredibly hard to save up and build and had a really nice life in, again, is represented as an internal object. When we lose it, there's an incredible discrepancy. I've got something within me that's looking for its match out in the world and it's not there. And we have this sense of dislocation. It's not there. And it's a very painful experience, and it generates this feeling of sadness and something's missing, and emptiness and pain. Now, we know that when that happens, the very painful nature of it evokes a wish to take the pain away. Well, one way is to put the thing that's lost there. But they only do that in Hollywood movies, don't they? In reality, it's not so simple. But we've got another system in us that will try and remedy it in the short term, which is I'm going to actually go into some form of wishing it was there, or imagining it's there, or denying that it's gone and waiting for it to come back. And we have this experience that's so familiar to all of us that, when someone we love dies, and we have this experience of expecting to see them at a certain point, and they're not there, and that happens in different ways. First of all, you expect to see them in the house, or when you come home, or when you go to visit grandpa and you see grandma to not be there and there's a huge gaping hole. And then when you come to grips with that, you somehow see the back of someone's head in some distance away in a shopping centre. You think that must be them. And so, again, this comes up, and this is because there's a part of us that hasn't fully accepted us. And we know that it takes a long time, very personal time, to actually come to this crucial point of acceptance. Accept the loss. That doesn't mean rationally and intellectually, because we might have, seen the house cleared away or gone to the funeral or whatever. But the real acceptance is when actually I know it's not there. And that seems to involve taking that internal model or image from the place, like on the surface of us, where we're waiting to connect it with something in the world there, and taking it somewhere else deeper inside. Somewhere where we can hang on to it and say, it's so painful they're not actually there, but they were there, they are a part of my life, they are still part of me, or that experience or that house or those objects are part of my life story, and they can't be taken away. And maybe I really love to talk about it with somebody who will listen. And so the acceptance, it allows for the beginning of this healing process. A loss is always a loss. So it's not as though it's never painful, but the healing process is, it's not an open bleeding wound all the time. And I can feel that I carry the richness of that person or that experience within me. And when that happens, we're starting to work through to the point where we can have a sense of still having this person or this object with us. And so there's this process of acceptance. So now, how do we get to acceptance? There's no shortcut. We know that the process of grief is the means by which we go there. It's the technical process of accepting the loss, grieving, which means feeling it. We know that if people don't feel the loss, they often still show evidence of being restricted by that loss a very long time later. It's very important that we have space, maybe privacy, maybe support to actually feel that loss and that grief. So this means as we're coming towards the time when the actual bad experience of the fire are going to be re-evoked, watch out for that experience of loss, whatever it might be. You know, you might have lost dear friends who have left the area, or anyway, I won't try and say it all, but many new losses will occur as well as old ones as things reorganise during the period of recovery. And so we just think about how that grief process and the trauma process absorb energy and disrupt our ability to get on with all the huge amount of work we have to do. That's where it becomes very important to understand that we can't use all of our resources in working in that cortisol mode, because if we do that, we don't have the emotional energy to actually manage the trauma and do that work of thinking through and processing and putting it in the past, or the grief work, which is feeling the sadness and working for the acceptance and hanging on to what we've learned or gained from that person or experience, and to be able to actually manage the emotions so it doesn't lead us into emotional overwhelm. So that means grief and trauma are very energy intensive. And that means as you run your marathon through this series of hurdles at the end of the year, have a think how you will recruit a bit of spare energy so that you can gain something from these as these things are reactivated. You can do some productive work, do some therapeutic work on these sad things, a lot of sad things. And anything we can do to understand it. Maybe if the grief is an important issue, getting some information from websites. The Centre for Grief and Bereavement have got lots of, it's probably mainly about people, but the principles are the same about understanding loss and grief. And what's so important, I think, is that we have a sense that we're in a community that's doing it together. I think being able to share experiences with your networks, talk about it, depersonalize it. It's not just me, we're all going through it. That's an enormously helpful feeling. It's the feeling that creates this sense of support, meaning it physically. I'm propped up by other people doing it together. And if we do that, engage in this, in community work, community processes, community meetings, networking, in whatever way we can. With COVID, we can't do it the way we would like to, but maybe we have to do that through Facebook and various other ways of finding out who's interested, or actually not hesitating to let our friends outside the area know it's going to be hard going through the next summer. I'd really find it helpful if I can just ring up every now and again and have a chat about how I'm feeling. I don't need you to be a counsellor. I just need you to listen, because it's what you say about yourself that's important. It's good if they can actually reflect something useful back to you, but in the end, they just have to be interested and listening. And try and let a few people who love you know that they can really do something to help. But they often need to be briefed, not to give you a whole lot of solutions. Well, solutions are great if they work, but often we just need talking time. Because anything we do in this way counteracts that egocentric quality of stress, becoming focused in myself. And when you add stress to grief and trauma, we're all in danger of becoming self-centered. And then our needs don't align and they conflict. And so we undermine the best resource, which is our local community, the multiple networks. If you can't find one network, look for another. And it can be around anything. Find what you have in common. Now, I want to say a bit about anniversaries and fire plans and so on as a sort of a framework for doing some of this work, but I wonder if anyone's got any questions here. So Malcolm is saying, hello, Malcolm, remember talking to you before. Will it help to get things going around and around in the brain out onto paper? Yes. You see, the real thing is it's about language. When we use language, we've got to use the top left-hand corner of our brain, which is a really good place to get to, because that's where we can see things, get perspective, understand things, use knowledge and ideas. It's where what the neuropsychologists call the regulatory mechanisms. So if I'm going to actually calm down my emotions, I'm not going to do it conductively by just taking my mind off it by, I don't know, drinking too much grog or watching television, binge watching Neighbours or something. But I'm not going to process my trauma, my grief that way. I'm just going to block it. If you can't do anything else, that's all right, but not the alcohol, but the Neighbours. I don't know which is the worst, actually, but we won't go there. What's much better is if you use words to give yourself a perspective. Do that work, I said. It's not the same kind of conditions that cause these fires, or it's only cloud, not smoke, even though it looks the same, or it's smoke from controlled burns, not a bushfire. It's not dangerous. I'm not in danger. You need to be in that top left-hand corner of your brain, and you get there by words and language. And so the first step will be to translate what you're feeling into words. And then you can think about it. If you can't get it into language, you can't think about it. You can just say, I just feel very upset. You have to say, hang on, the smoke is making me anxious. Why is that? Because the fire, etc. Hang on, it's only planned burn. It's different. Smell it. It's planned burn smoke. And you'll have to do it many, many times. So getting it onto paper, if there's no one to talk to, get it onto paper. There's a guy called Penny Baker in the United States that's done a whole lot of research on journaling after disasters, where you got people to keep, measured all their symptoms, got to keep a journal for, I don't know, a few months and came back and measured their symptoms compared to other people who weren't journaling. And the people who were journaling had a significant reduction in symptoms. And so it really does work. And then it's, of course, even better to talk to people, provided that the people are good listeners and don't tell you a whole lot of things that don't work. Let's have a look at what else we've got. are the 3 stress states kind of protecting your brain from shock in a way? Is there a reason to try and pull through them, or is it better to just pace through with understanding that it's just where you are at for now? Yeah, the whole point about the stress is that it's an adaptation to help us survive the stress. Now, evolution is interested in us procreating, isn't it? That's all. So, you know, if I'm being chased by saber-toothed tigers, the most likely person to survive will be the person who gets most frightened and runs fastest with the most adrenaline, isn't it? Right? They'll be the most likely to outrun the tiger. Someone who's running along beside them, who's old and says, we must think of a way of making these guys extinct, otherwise we're never going to have a peaceful time in this planet, is likely to get eaten. And so the adaptation to save yourself from the stress, or even go through the cortisol state, which was probably in those days not running away from tigers, but surviving a famine, is shut everything down and just continue to exist. And then you come out the other side, you can procreate and your genes go on. But what's happened is you've actually lost everything else, right? So the survival is always at a cost. And that's what we're talking about, because we now are not running away from saber-toothed tigers. We've got lots of supports, and we don't have to go into such an expensive state that will shut everything down and create a survival state, which means we come out the other side with diminished lives. That's the risk, diminished lives. And so in some way they're protective in the moment, and we're not saying you shouldn't go into them. We're saying as soon as you can, you need to modify them and start doing it slower and steadier, so that you can have the advantage of the stress, which is I get a lot of work done, but as long as I take time out and hold my family together and hang on to my health, and then on Monday morning I go back into it for another week, etc. What else have we got here? Smoker started, and burning. Dealing with communities about spring or autumn plan burning and pre-summer bushfire preparedness. I reckon what's so important is to try and ensure, now, maybe the guys that are doing the burn may not be fully trauma informed as to how disturbing it might be for people. They're busy, they've got lots of priorities. It's really, I think, valuable to make sure that you get on to community leaders or local government or whatever and say, please give us warning, give us notice, so that you know and can get ready for the presence of smoke and hang on to your ability to do the work. I want to say a few things about preparedness in a minute, but would I encourage any community meetings for bushfire preparation to include children and young people, enabling them to be part of this planning? Absolutely. Now, it may be you want to give thought as to how you prepare stuff and present it, if particularly you've got young children. But I like to tell the story of the intelligent professional woman who, the Wednesday evening of Ash Wednesday, was sitting by the pool in her bikini. I like to think of her as drinking a martini, but I'm not sure whether she was or not. And she notices her children wearing jeans and long sleeve cotton shirts, walking back and forwards to the car with their teddies. What are you doing? She said. We're putting all our teddies and precious things in the car because there's a fire over the hill. We can see the smoke. Oh, don't be silly, she said. 10 minutes later, she's driving the car out with her kids and all their precious teddies and books and things being loaded into, and all she's retrieved is her bikini. That's all she retrieved from her house, the bikini she was standing up in at the time. Somebody in Queensland once at a conference told me that she'd done a whole lot of research on bushfire, on disaster preparedness. And the only evidence she could find that it was ever effective was when it was applied to primary school children. Adolescents don't take much notice, and parents have got better things to do. So these children really knew and were calmly doing what they needed to do. I could give numerous other examples. Sometimes teenagers are the ones who hold the frame of reference. I remember, I'll tell you this anecdote of a woman who evacuated down the back again in Ash Wednesday in the back of Mount Macedon down towards Wood End. And the road, if you've ever been, winds in and out of the forest. The forest was all on fire, and she had 2 teenage sons, and she's driving, and she was a very anxious, panicky woman. And there's a whole lot of bush going off down onto the flat, and the flames are coming down, and she's wanting to take a dirt road off into the bush. And her 15-year-old son is sitting beside her in the car, slapping her face, saying, "Mum, don't leave the road, don't leave the road, don't leave the road." Now, she told me this herself. She said, if it had been me, I would have driven away from the fire, down an unknown dirt track. God knows what would have happened. We probably would have died. My son saved our lives. He knew this is a simple fact, stick to the bitumen road. So I give numerous examples. I think it's very important, but probably we need to present the information in a way that really makes sense to kids. That for young children, we don't frighten them. If we get too frightened, it doesn't help preparation. But it also gives them a role. And I think it's very important that the whole family has the common picture and the common map in their mind of what they're going to do. Right, so Penny Baker, yes, one word, Penny Baker. Somebody's asking. P-E, there it is in the, we'll make sure that the questions go out to P-E-N-N-E B-A-K-E-R, yep. Alpine Shy of an annual REAP day for primary schools, yep. Red Pillows Case Prepared program. Okay, I think we've dealt with those. Let's talk about anniversaries. Anniversaries are landmarks, aren't they? They mark the year. The year is a unit. It's marked by the seasons as well. But the anniversary is a symbol. It's a human symbol. It's about a meaning, what something means. An anniversary means it happened last year. And every year we will remember this time. Anzac Day. Think about what Anzac Day does to tell us about Australian history and Australian culture, and numerous other things. So as we come up to this anniversary, a lot in our nature is going to want to make this loop back. New Year's Eve or whatever day it is in your area. And it's going to be important. It's a symbol of the meaning of the loss, the disruption, the trauma, whatever was involved. All of those things are symbolized in this day. We can't really just describe what that means. It's just full of feeling. And the anniversary means we're a year past it. That creates a lot of confused feelings. I don't want to think about it. Is it a year already? It's a year already. It's taken such a long time. And what the anniversary means will be not only about what the event meant to people, and it meant something different for everybody, but what the intervening year has meant for everybody, the beginning of a very long, difficult time or time of great opportunity and learning and so on. And so there are going to be multiple different meanings. Now we know that there is a certain strata of human nature that responds only to symbols and rituals. Rational talk, simple emotions don't touch it. Symbols really touch it enormously. That's why all cultures, human cultures, generate rituals and symbols, even if it's a ritual of a sausage sizzle on Anzac Day, down by the War Memorial or whatever. So there is a deep feeling of satisfaction in engaging in some kind of ritualistic process. If you've ever, I don't know, missed a funeral that meant a lot to you and you just couldn't get there, and you know that it's just some kind of sense of settling it and taking it in that hasn't happened. So as we go towards the anniversary, if we can think about how we can use it as an opportunity to meet this need for symbols and rituals, then it's going to be enormously comforting and healthy. And it's also going to anchor us in that all-important sense that time is passing and it is receding into the past. Because the real solution to trauma is to convert the experience from being eternally in the present. Whenever it's triggered, it's there and I'm having it again. To convert it from that into history. History is something that happened in the past that tells us something about ourselves. And then it's a really important experience. Convert trauma into history. We do that through narratives, through stories, through putting it in time, through understanding the sequence of events, looking at where we are now versus where we are then, before and after pictures or something. So therefore, the anniversary is a very important opportunity to bring the community together to meet this need. But everybody's different. And so if you ask people, what do you want to do for the anniversary? Some people are, it's such a horrible time, I don't even want to think about it. I'm not going to do anything at all. I'm going to have an absolutely normal day. And others are saying, I'm going to take the entire day off and I'm going to go to the place where my house used to be and lay flowers and weep and, you know, remember and everything in between. And no one can judge what a person needs to do. But therefore, what I would say is, I think it's terribly important as you're heading towards it, well before you get there, ask yourself, ask your family, what would I like to do to give a feeling of satisfaction, even if it involves having painful feelings? If it's going to be painful, what kind of supports can I put around myself to make it bearable and constructive and creative? Who would I like to be with me? Who do I not want to be with me? Where would I like to do? What would be comforting? What would I do afterwards? You know, you can think about, that can be a project that you've got a few months to think about, so that you start to form up for yourself something that would be satisfying to you. And maybe there'll be other people that would like to do it your way. And there may be others who want to do it something differently. So what I'd be saying is, I think from a community's point of view, I think what's of great advantage is that there are a range of options available for people to mark that anniversary. You know, there might be one group that feel they want the brass band to march up and down the main street and have a choir singing We Shall Overcome and have a barbecue in the main street, the shopping centre at Malakuta, you know, and whatever. And maybe there's a whole other group who just don't want to do anything like that. They want to go and sit on the beach and whatever. So why not have a range of possibilities? There could be a civil ceremony of some sort. There could be church services. There could be, I don't know, tree planting. revegetation activities, whatever people need. And that people can then choose if there are a number of options that have been maybe generated by community people putting their ideas in. Maybe the professionals who are working with community members can sort of raise that in the sessions they have with people and saying, what are you thinking? And maybe then again, they can put that information through to whoever's planning it, maybe Madra. Whatever networks can sort of bring this information together and plan a range of options so people can choose what they want. The important thing is that people have a sense of, I can own this anniversary because I can attach my own needs to it. And then I can feel this is serving my recovery. And I can use it for therapeutic purposes. And I reckon it's important to have a component in there where you can do something to express your feelings. Don't just feel it, but do something. And you can talk, you could talk to people from Black Saturday, and there were many interesting activities undertaken in different communities. And then just think about what will meet this need for symbols, rituals, and so on. So what's permeating all this is that we coexist as different people engaged in dealing with one big common event from different points of view. We respect each other. We're not entitled to judge each other because it means something unique for each person. And therefore we pride ourselves on creating this opportunity for people to do what they need to do. We don't know what is meaningful to others, but we can respect them and help them by supporting what they want to do. There's two other things I wanted to talk about. So look, Malcolm's saying celebrate surviving. Black Saturday, some people wanted to get together as a community to commemorate on the day, and others keep to themselves at home. All are okay. That's right. Some people may want to just be at home quietly with their family. Some want to build memorials. Some people, unveiled sculptures. I remember one man who went round and retrieved bits of melted debris and so on, and welded sculptures out of them and made things from them, and these sort of things. Art exhibition. The artists are very helpful here. Songs and dramatic performances, anything like that can be harnessed. So, any other questions on anniversaries? It's a great opportunity that can be of great therapeutic help. With the preparedness and planning, I think the important thing you can do in the next period of time is to, people sometimes have a lot of difficulty thinking about what they would do. You've all had the experience of going through it, presumably in some way or another. Remember that on the day, the memory system that needs to come into play is the action memory system. That's quite different from the verbal memory system. So if you sit on a beautiful Saturday afternoon with the sun streaming in through the windows at your dining room table with the family, and you write down a beautiful fire plan, it's all expressed in language, isn't it? In words. There might be a few diagrams, but it's going to be in words. when the fire comes over the hill and you go into adrenaline mode, you're going to be in the right side of your brain, which is really good from running away from saber-toothed tigers. It's no good for thinking in words. And you've probably all been in that state where you know you couldn't read stuff, you couldn't think clearly, sometimes you can't even speak coherently. And if the time you need the plan most urgently, you can only have a verbal plan. It's going to be sitting in your left hemisphere. You're not going to be able to get into it, just like pulling a large document off the shelf. You're not going to be able to read it. So therefore, you might write the plan down on your dining room table on that beautiful sunny Saturday afternoon. But if you don't enact it, by enact it, I mean actually do it, you probably will have a lot of trouble performing your plan on the day when you need it. And so therefore I'd be saying, have this constant relationship between thinking about your plan and then enacting it. It's not enough to know that you will go to the pump and you will start it. Well, you've got to actually be able to start it with your eyes shut in the dark when you can't breathe, don't you? So the starting process has to be so automatic that you don't need to think about it. Because we won't be able to actually engage in problem-solving thinking on the day. I like to talk about the man who bought a brand new Honda fire pump as Black Saturday bore down on them. He went down and he went home and he told his family to go down to the nearest pub. As the fire approached, he started the pump. He connected it all up, started it. It was working beautifully. He grabbed the hose and ran towards his boundary where the flames were starting, but he hadn't actually thought of measuring how long the fire hose was, had he? So he ran and, of course, got to the end of the fire hose, pulled the pump off its stand, and it stalled, and he still wasn't at the fence. He hadn't stopped to think about how far the fire hose reached because he was in adrenaline mode, focused on the flames. I've got to get to the flames and put the flames out. And he rushed back and he started cranking the pump and trying to get it going and trying to get it going, and it wouldn't start. And he got more and more desperate and the flames were coming closer. So he grabbed his phone, thank God for mobile phones, rang his wife at the pub and said, ask if anyone knows how to work Honda fire pumps. And she said, as it happened, she passed the phone from one person to another until finally it got to a person who did. And when I told this story after Black Saturday, one day somebody rang me up and said, I was the guy. I'm a fire pump technician. I have a fire pump business, and I was in the pub on that day, and somebody handed the phone to me. So what does he do? The first thing he says is, what kind of pump it is? Okay. Have you checked the ignition? Right? In a good moment, that'd be the first thing we look at. Check if the ignition's not on, it's not going to work. And the guy looked at the switch and thought, oh, the ignition's gone off. You see, he didn't engage in sort of the simplest problem solving. The pump has stopped. Let's go through from the beginning. Let's see if the ignition's on. Oh, it's gone off. Okay, I'll switch it on. Boom. It started first time. And I think he saved his house. But you see, the simplest problem solving thinking may be unavailable to us in the moment. That's what we have to prepare for. Not really the business of having a pump and so on. It's being able to use it. The pump will be no good if you can't use it, will it? So that the mental preparation, the psychological preparedness, which means getting the thinking processes automated so that you don't have to think with your hemisphere because you won't be in there. You'll be in this reptile brain. So I like to say, work out your fire plan and then practice it with your dirtiest, oldest pair of dark glasses, your teenage son's iPod on heavy metal in full volume in your ears, and someone blowing a hairdryer, and I'd now add to it, and a face mask that's been left in the fireplace for a couple of weeks with the smoke in it. Now try and start the fire pump and do all the things, because it's that sensory, and you know, you only have to go through one fire and you know the way the sensory world is distorted. So that the plan is stored as a series of motor memories, of action memories. And think about everything that could go wrong and have a backup system for it. So then I think you have, as you approach these things, you have the anniversary, you have the hot weather, the burn-offs, the anniversary, and the fire planning. All of these things are going to bring the fire up again in various ways, aren't they? And they are very useful ways of beginning to do this therapeutic work around trauma and loss, as you feel able to. You know, we can say this one thing of sort of give a person a EMDR session in a counselling session about their PTSD. But the real thing is, can they get out there and do their preparations? And we'll find for most people, there'll be ample opportunity to revisit and reprocess all of the experiences they had at the time as they head into this really important time around the first anniversary. And if we embrace it as a chance to process this stuff, digest it, undo those triggers, separate the past from the future, and put it into history, then this is going to be a very therapeutic time for us. I just wanted to finish up with the issue of, well, in the research in bushfires, the technical term is help seeking. When do people seek help? We know that often many community members see people that they worry about, sometimes in the mirror in the morning, but we won't worry about that. But sometimes they see their neighbours and friends and they really worry about them. And they try to persuade them to go and get some help. And they don't go. And they keep on not going for a long time. And this is such a familiar experience in disasters that American academics have done research and written papers on it. And, you know, we could talk about this at great length. We haven't got time. But these are people that everyone else can see have got symptoms. That is, they've got some kind of reactions that show that there's a degree of distress. Now, the crucial thing is having symptoms is not the same as being aware of them. Right? That's the nature of stress, is that I may look dysfunctional, but I'm not aware I'm dysfunctional. I'm aware of all the problems I've got, and please get out of my way and stop talking to me about getting help because I've got a lot of stuff to do. So what we have to do is create an environment for people that promotes help seeking in a non-threatening way. And so the first thing is we've got to promote an awareness of what symptoms are. The memory problems, for instance, the sense of emotional overwhelm, the emotional instability that people might feel, the looking exhaustion but not being able to sleep. Now, there's no guarantee that a person actually sees them as something that in any way is going to be helped by going and sitting in a room with someone I've never met before who didn't even go through this thing. There'll be a lot of people who don't have any sense of what the connection is. And so what we have to help them understand is it means your nervous system is overwrought. And maybe if it's traumatic stuff, it means there's something that you haven't quite got hold of there that you need to define more clearly and have something you can do in your mind to deal with it as it comes up. And so I think rather than actually telling people they should really go and get help and I'm really worried about you, we should actually try and make sure that we feed through to whomever's in a position to do this, from the agencies around, Red Cross, Gateway Health, the council, MADRA, just feed through that you're aware of people who you think need help and are not interested in getting it, so that the sort of information starts to come through the community and raise people's awareness. The social networking is a great way of promoting this, and anecdotes about what helped, anecdotes about people who did go and see some strange person in a room and they found it was very helpful, or nowadays had a telehealth consultation and they found something really useful. You know, people often don't need to have a huge number of sessions. They just need a few pointers to help them actually pinpoint what the problem is. But we also need to respect that people have their own coping devices and they have their own sequence of how they're going to do things. A case in point was a man I kept being told about in one of the Black Saturdays communities who had suffered great loss in his family, and people were so worried about him. They wanted him to go and see a counsellor, but he didn't. He actually spent his time giving his time, energy and skills to help people rebuild. And he did this in all sorts of very practical ways. And I kept being asked about him. They said, what should we do? And I said, just be supportive of him. Don't annoy him. Just keep an open communication to him and wait. Because the fact is, we can't make a person go for help. If we make a person go for help and they do go, it probably won't be that helpful. Respect their own timing and just be supportive and see what you can do to help them in a simple way. And I think it was towards the end of the 3rd year, I went back to that particular community once more for one of these sessions. And after the session, this fellow came up and started talking to me about what he was doing and what he'd been doing for a long time, and then what his losses were. And I realised this is the bloke they've been talking to me about for the last 3 years. And when he finished talking, he said, you know, it's been really important for me with my own losses to actually get out there and do something useful. And that's given my life a sense of meaning. He lost people that were really close to him. It's given my life a sense of meaning, he said. In other words, he's built something to live for by doing things to help people. But he said, I'm really starting to feel low now. Of course, many of the people he'd been helping were moving on. They were moving into their houses, getting back to their lives. And now he was actually starting to see, I've got to get now my life in order. And he said, I think I'm ready now for help. Can you make a suggestion as to who I might see? And so, you know, I did that for him, and I don't actually know what happened, but he was very grateful to receive the suggestion I made for him. But it was really a case in point that we have to have the long-term view for people so that we actually have this perspective, not making them get help because we're worried about them, and that's often where the motivation comes. I'm worried about you, please go and get help and then I'll be able to relax. No, we just be supportive. Invite them for dinner. No, we can't do that. Can you do that in Malakuta, have dinner? Yeah, maybe you can. Anyway, do nice things for them. Just chat to them, support them in any way you can. Open the conversation. Let it be driven by them, and they'll find, well, this person's interested in me. That's already a support. And then maybe if they're going to really need it, eventually they will say, I think I need to talk to someone. But it might be 3 years down the track. What's important is that when they do it, they're ready, and then it'll be great. Now, I just want to finish with this one point. The researchers talk about distress. there's a few things that they identify as causing a lot of distress. People having multiple obligations, multiple roles. That's one of the biggest pressures. Often women are noticed in these research programs to have greater stress than the men, because if you analyse the roles, they're often engaging in multiple roles. They're looking after the family, they're communicating, they're dealing with the council, they're doing this, that and the other, and the men are building the fences. The middle-aged people are often have more responsibilities. They're looking after elderly parents and looking after kids or whatever. So this sense, I think, the people, looking out for people who've got multiple obligations and roles and recognising that that's a particular demand and helping them with those where we can. And stress reduces a sense of control. We can get control by saying, I only choose to do what I can do, and I'm going to actually put aside what I can't do yet. And being more clever in what we try to tackle. Having some kind of experience, training and knowledge. So gaining knowledge about these things is very important in being able to do them. Keeping alive a complex sense of self, which is keeping connection with all the multiple interests and hobbies. Having a hobby that gives you joy, even when everything else you can go. It could be anything. It could be stamp collecting or playing golf or whatever, so that you know, come Saturday afternoon, I've had a terrible week, I'm going to open out my stamp collection, or I'm going to go play golf, or whatever it might be, and I'll enjoy it. And confidence. It's amazing how much the sense of confidence in the future. And nowadays, I can tell you after all the years, the amount of support available and the length of time that it's available is increasing all the time, and it's fantastic to see it. And we know that come 5-10 years down the track, most people will be leading good lives. They won't be the same, but they'll be leading good lives. And that's what you have to prepare yourself so that when you get to that point, you're actually able to take advantage of it. I hope those ideas are helpful. And remember, the number one resilience factor that's been found in research and disaster recovery is social capital, which translates into networks. Networks of people who like us, who will enjoy being with us, who will give us information, who will help us out, who will just let us know that they, like us, are going through the same thing so that we belong together. And that sense of being part of a community, I think country people have a fantastic skill at, but take care of your community because they can get hurt and damaged. So I hope those thoughts are helpful.